If you're in perimenopause or menopause and you have had symptoms that you have Googled or you have asked a friend about, or maybe you've asked me about, or your doctor or anyone else, chances are you've been told about hormone therapy, which is absolutely the right thing to do because menopause hormone therapy can be a game changer for lots of people. But as some of you probably know, it wasn't great for me. It just didn't work out for all kinds of reasons. And so I was one of those people who was left wondering, well, what else can I do? What other options do I have? There are a lot of conversations that we still need to be having about non-hormonal treatment options because you may be someone who can't take them. You may be someone who doesn't want to for whatever reason, or you might be stuck somewhere in the middle like me, wanted to, tried to, and just didn't feel better on them. That's why I invited Dr. Suzanne Gilberg-Lenz to talk about non-hormonal treatments. Dr. Suzanne is an author. She's written a book called The Menopause Bootcamp. She's an integrative health practitioner and, had worked very much in an evidence-based practice and way about having these conversations about things like herbs and supplements. But she's really an advocate for informed choice and empowerment. She wants women to feel empowered with their decisions, and she wants women to feel like they are being supported. So I knew that she was the perfect person to have this conversation with about, if I can't take hormones, what else can I do? So we cover a lot of great topics. We do cover some of the kind of myths and facts and questions around who can and can't and who shouldn't, and what should you do if you're looking for more information. So this is a really great episode for maybe people who are just wanting to know what the other options are, because hormones are great, but if you can't take them or don't want to, it's good to know what your other options are. So I would love to hear from those of you who might be in the same situation as I was. What helped? What did you do? What did you find helpful in managing the symptoms of menopause? Hi, Dr. Suzanne. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, hello. It's so nice to see you again.
I know it. We actually had a very similar conversation a few years ago when you were writing your book, The Menopause Bootcamp, and that's been out for how long now?
It's been a little over 2 years since it was published.
Wow.
So October of 22, which is like the menoverse exists in a completely different form than it did when you and I were talking. And we were talking because I came to you because you were one of the first people that I really met online that I felt a kinship with. There were sort of a group of people that we were following each other online that were sort of doing similar work in a similar space, but they had some synergy. And I felt like your perspective on nutrition and food and lifestyle and the growth mindset we have to have about our bodies around nourishment was really important. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really nice to hear. And it's also why I invited you today, because after reading your book, and I think like most of us who are in this menopause or midlife space, I read all the books that come out, or at least kind of have a glance at them. And one of the things that I appreciate about your perspective, both online in your work and in your book, is the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is that holistic approach and talking about non-hormonal treatments. And so the disclaimer that I'm going to say is that neither one of us are anti-HRT or menopause hormone therapy. I fully believe that it is a choice that everybody should have, and that it has been life-changing for people. But for whatever reason, there are people, myself included, who don't do well with it. It doesn't make things better. And there are some people who can't or just don't want to use it.
Right.
And so many of the conversations around hormone therapy or around managing symptoms really revolve around, HRT is the center of the universe.
Right.
And so, so I just wanted to invite you on, and but maybe why don't you just start by giving everyone a little intro? Other than writing this amazing book, who are you?
Well, I mean, I'm a board certified OBGYN. I do not do obstetrics anymore. I stopped delivering babies or attending births 3 years ago, it feels like a million years ago. But also it really is a blip on the radar. So it's kind of surprising to me how much your world changes when you only do gynecology. but I'm also board certified, or I was board certified in the past in integrative and holistic medicine. And I came to that because I always had an interest in indigenous health, in East, what at the time was being referred to as Eastern medicine. I had studied Ayurveda previously, and myself was a practitioner of yoga and meditation, always very, very interested in the healing properties of botanicals, of plants. So I'd already been kind of doing that work, had studied Ayurveda, and then the opportunity to sort of make it more official came up. I haven't, to be honest, stayed super involved in that community other than continuing to be a bridge. But for 20, so people need to understand, like, this is something that doesn't seem weird now, but 25 years ago when I started practicing, it was definitely outlier land. And I was actually kind of quiet about it, Jen, because I didn't, I wanted to make sure that I was practicing evidence-based medicine, that I was working within the standard of care, that my patients and conventional colleagues took me seriously, especially as a young woman. Like there's a lot, there's a lot to unpack in all of that. But I'm glad I did it the way I did it. I just continued to self-study, and people started hearing about me and understanding that, like, I mean, really honestly, that I just wasn't hostile toward it, and that I was actually knowledgeable and interested. I mean, really, that is how low the bar was, like no
Not
lack of
hostile, where the
hostility.
bar was.
Yeah, but I mean, unfortunately, in the more allopathic conventional world, there still is quite a bit of that actually, still.
Yeah.
Like somehow it's less than, not really realizing that most of our medicine is coming from indigenous medicine anyways. Like, where do you think it came from? You think you made it up? That's funny. That's cute. I mean, it's not the
And
case. I
the
mean,
integrative,
people use plants. People use plants and lifestyle. They always did. Always did. That's not new.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much historical context to just even the word
Yeah.
medicine, right? That, we need to acknowledge that medicine doesn't necessarily mean drug. That
Right.
medicine has a much
Right.
broader context, and that there are
Yes.
different ways. But even just the term medicine is so polarized that, it's either
Yes.
medicine is what we call the highest evidence-based treatment that is, board certified by the FDA, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not really, I think, the intent of medicine. I
No,
think we're
no,
getting
it's
on like
about
a
a
side
healing.
tangent here.
Well, I know. It's just because of me, because I always do that. So,
I
so
love
that's
it.
my background. That's my background. I practice in a fully conventional setting, but with the heart and the mind of an integrated approach, bringing in any and everything that I think may be helpful and has evidence to support its use. So there is efficacy and safety around these practices. But I think we're getting tangential, but we're not, because it kind of gets to the heart of what healing and what medicine is, in my perspective, and I think you share this perspective, and that is something ineffable. What we do when we work with people who come to us seeking support and guidance and trying to either optimize their health or get better from an illness is not, it's not one thing. It is the conversation, it's the listening, it's the creating space, and it's making sure that we are evolving with their needs, and as we get more information. So I think it actually is really germane, and that is what I have done always and what I continue to do.
And that comes across in your book. For anybody who hasn't read it, it definitely is, I think, one of the more balanced approaches to menopause that's out there, and I definitely appreciate the experience that you bring to that. So,
Thank
if
you.
we can talk about what we mean by non-hormonal treatments. So, I'm just going to kind of bring some context to the conversation, where people will often say to me, I tried hormones and they didn't work, or they made me feel worse, or I can't take hormones for whatever reason. Um, I What are my options? Because it feels like the only option that is being presented or driven by the main narrative is it's hormones, go big or go home. That's kind of hormones or bust. So what do we even mean by non-hormonal treatments? What is the definition of that?
Well, to me, it's a really broad, it's a broad category, because it is anything that is not hormones. And it can be botanicals, it can be supplements, it can be micronutrients, it can be macronutrients. But a lot of it really is lifestyle stuff. And it's coming from the preventative medicine and the longevity space. And there's and also a lot from kind of sports medicine and nutritional medicine spaces. So, I think the great thing about social media is that people like us can talk to each other, and that the conversation has gotten really big, and we're reaching people that we never would have reached, and people feel powerful, seen, and heard. And I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of advocacy that's going on, and a lot of people taking control and realizing that they have agency in the conversation. That's the beautiful thing. And there are many beautiful things. The problem is the binary approach, the conflict kind of promoting approach, the clickbait approach, the this or that, and most people who are in this space in a serious way as educators, as professionals, I don't think that they really are meaning to promote that binary or that conflict. But that's that soundbite, is that what comes out. And so that people are like hearing hormone, hormone, hormone. Well, I mean, even if you look at the evidence, it's hormone plus, right? Like you can take all the hormones and you can achieve some levels that are made up, that were, when you were 20 years old, right? Whatever the hell that means. And not be healthy and not be preventing the diseases or the conditions of frailty and aging that we are trying to avoid, right? What is this about? This is about feeling good in our own skin, being present, enjoying our lives, and trying to achieve a health span, right? Like being around as long as possible in a healthy state where we can be productive, functioning, doing what we want to do, enjoying life. Like this is not that you're going to be 25, that your skin's going to look, that you're all the weight that you've been battling, which is really like a mind body thing and a psychological thing also, and a cultural thing. Like, no, that's not how this works. You don't write a script for anything, an herb or a medicine or a hormone, because hormones, I guess, are medicines, but they're not really, in my mind, medicines. None of that's going to happen without the foundations, the pillars, right? And this is where I do get back to my Ayurvedic roots, which is, look, sleep, stress, sexual health, whatever that means for you, because that doesn't necessarily mean having like cis hetero penetrative sex, but being
Mhm.
like in your body in a very specific sensual way. Nutrition, movement, strength, right? So these are things that are the basics. But I think when you look at like, so those to me are non-hormonal treatments, or whatever.
Yeah.
The botanicals, I think, is where I really am interested in how these products work and what the evidence is. And I think um, that's a really, I love talking about that too, because there is some pretty decent evidence for very specific herbs for everything from hot flashes to sleep and mood. And so these
Yeah.
are things that people can choose to use, but I think they need to be careful, right? Because everything that comes across your feed based on your user algorithm and marketing is not created equally.
Yeah.
And I think the other challenge people face is working with a practitioner who has any real confidence or knowledge around this, because this is where you get a lot of like, that's not safe. Like even now, okay, so I'm not going to name the brand, but like in the last couple weeks, I saw a lot of posting about a popular supplement that is used for hair growth, right? And because there was a case report of liver failure. This is always, by the way, what happens. There's a case
Yeah.
report, a case report. And even though it's true that one case report may mean that there's many more that weren't reported, but give me a break. Can we just okay, really one case report of liver failure? So now we're going to say this brand is terrible and you should be careful, and ashwagandha is trying to kill you. And do you know how many death from acetaminophen are reported every year? It's like 1,800 or something. Like it's a lot. And that's
Yeah.
over the counter. So
Yeah.
stop it. That makes me mad. But having said that, you do have to be careful. And I think if you're working with practitioners that are not well educated in this area, you need to understand what you're doing if you're going to talk to them about what you're using, so that you're not just getting shut down and scared.
And this is one of the big problems, I think, in the integrative space in general, is
Yeah.
there's a lack of regulation of not only the products, but the practitioners.
Yeah.
It varies by country, it
Yeah.
varies by state, by province. I'm living in the EU, which, everything is different as well. So the problem is that there's no standardization. And
Yeah.
so it really
Yeah.
does come down to, I hate the word do your research because that has been co opted, but being
Yeah.
able to have trustworthy conversations with maybe
Yeah.
other healthcare practitioners that you know and
Yeah.
trust who can guide you to working with
Yeah.
the right person or guide you towards that.
Well, I will
So
say that in
when
the United States, though, I do want to say this. We do have the DSHEA, the dietary supplement and
yeah,
health and something. It's not, you know, it's not that it's unregulated. It's regulated differently than the
yeah,
FDA. It's not as strictly regulated. And I think I'm not like some conspiracy theorist. I'm not like a major outlier, but I think we all know the FDA is motivated, especially when you look at the women's health space in some weird ways. Like, so the FDA is, I'm glad we have regulation and I believe we should regulate, but it's not 100% accurate that the supplements aren't regulated at all, but they are
yes,
not
this is true.
regulated as strictly, and there's no prescription, there's no prescribing. In other words, you don't have to get them from a regulated, licensed practitioner. So it does become the Wild West. And that's how you get supplements in your feed that are like, what is that? So
Well,
let's
and I
just
think the
say,
difference,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I
Yeah.
was going to say, I think the difference too is that drugs, by the FDA and equivalent organizations are regulating a little bit more for efficacy,
Right.
whereas supplements are regulated for safety, which is
Yes.
important so that
Yes.
you know that you're not going to have like lead and mercury and all those kinds of things and
Right.
contaminants. But there
Right. But
really
are they
is.
going to do what they say? Yeah.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
Wild West part that you can have
Yeah.
companies put together a safe
Yeah.
blend of herbs or,
Yeah.
supplements
Yeah.
or whatever, but really it's working with that practitioner who can help you figure out, okay, this is
Exactly.
actually
Exactly.
this is where the evidence is for efficacy, and then these are some safe brands that you can try. Like that's
Exactly.
kind of where I think the missing conversation often is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can we just backtrack a little bit? What are some of the reasons why someone couldn't use hormone therapy? Because I feel like this is a very muddy conversation because there's a
Yeah.
lot of like myth and lore.
Yes.
Someone, people will say, my great grandmother's sister had breast cancer,
Right.
so I can't
Right.
take hormones. So, what are some of the kind of contraindications to hormone therapy that might make someone consider alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, they're actually pretty limited. People who are known to have a genetic predisposition for blood clotting and who have had blood clots. So, and when people have blood clots, either what we call a deep vein thrombosis, so usually originating in the leg, or more dangerously when it breaks off and goes to the lung or the brain, that's what we're trying to prevent. Okay, so people who have had what's called an unprovoked clot, in other words, they weren't, pregnant or post-surgical or have cancer or sitting on a long flight for 18 hours. These are things that we know increase anybody's risk. But people who had an unprovoked clot, they're really not a candidate. You're now on blood thinners for life. No, you're not a
Yeah.
candidate for systemic estrogen. Okay?
Yes. Thanks for
Like,
clarifying that
that's
too.
really important. If you've had a stroke or a heart attack, you're really no longer a candidate. You really aren't. Even though we know that transdermal estradiol through the skin really doesn't increase your risk for a blood clot, I think anybody who prescribes would be extremely careful with that. If you're currently being treated for an estrogen dependent cancer, that's kind of it. It's not family history. It's not genetic. Like, let's say you're a carrier of BRCA1 or 2, which are high risk conditions for estrogen dependent cancers. Um, if you have been managed appropriately, and let's say you've had preventative surgeries, you can use hormone therapy. If you
Wow.
have family members that have had breast cancer, you can use hormone therapy. I'm a breast cancer survivor. I've been very public about this because of the data that I think exists, and I'm not encouraging anybody to do anything. I'm telling you what I do. I am an 11-year breast cancer survivor, and I am on hormone therapy because
Wow.
I understand the data, and that's another podcast. We can talk about that at another time. So it is not cut and dry. And when we say estrogen dependent, that means there's receptors. Doesn't mean the breast cancer was caused by estrogen, because that's actually not what the science says. That's right. I'm going to say it again. Receptor status doesn't mean that the thing that fits in the receptor caused the cancer. That's not what it means. So that's really important. There's actually not that many people who can't use hormones. Strictly speaking, people may choose not to use hormones. People may have had bad reactions to hormones. And I do want to say that every single one of those people on that list that I just gave you, Jen, who can't use systemic hormones, can use vaginal estrogen. for
Yes.
the prevention of urinary and vaginal symptoms, which is very, very important to know. That's not what the podcast is about. But I
But always
think,
important to say, so thank you.
yeah, and I think the other thing that I say all the time is that it's not informed consent if you don't have all the information. So sometimes people are choosing not to use hormones because they have been they are adopting the narrative that's a mythology that isn't accurate. And so as long as people understand, like, these are reasons that you could use, that you might choose, that you might not choose, why you can't, as long as they understand that and where they fit into that, and if they're choosing not to use hormones, that is totally okay. It's not okay when they didn't get the information and they got scared off of them. That I have a problem with. So having said that, it's not really a huge number of people that can't use hormones, but not a lot of people. We know in this country, something like 4%, depending, 4 to 6% of women who are the age of hormone therapy are on it. So the fact is that the vast majority of women in the United States are not using hormone therapy. Okay, so what can we use? Assuming that, I mean, it's not true, but let's say, 95% of women in the United States don't want to use hormones. Okay, that's not true. But let's say a lot of them really are making a choice in the affirmative. Then what can they do? There's so many things they can do. I think it depends on what the issue is for them, right?
Yeah.
What are they trying to address? Are they trying to address specific symptoms? Are they trying to look at longevity, bone, brain, and heart health? Because those are the things that are gonna kill us, not breast cancer, you know?
Very true.
Right. And
And
those
I
are all
love
lifestyle things. Those are lifestyle.
I love that you referred to it as hormones plus because I think hormones are such an important piece of the conversation for many people,
Yeah.
especially depending, people who go into early and premature ovarian
Yes.
insufficiency, all that kind of stuff. Like they're very important. But the plus part, I think, is that missing piece of the conversation. And so it's really one part of what needs to be a relatively big pie of things that you do to support your health and your wellness and how you kind of feel and survive and thrive. Um, I'd love to hear your take on one of the kind of controversial things that came out in the UK last year, which was recommending cognitive behavior therapy as a first
Yeah.
line non hormonal treatment. And I mean, there are some types. So CBTI, which is cognitive based behavioral therapy for insomnia, I think the evidence is quite good. And I certainly have
Mm-hmm.
had lots of people say that it has been a game changer for their sleep issues. So
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
not at all a knock on CBT, but there was
Right.
a lot of flack when the government guidelines came out with that. What I mean, did that make it to your side of the pond?
Oh
Like, was
yeah.
this
Oh
a
yeah.
big thing? Or
Oh yeah.
okay,
Yeah. Well, and
and
amongst the menopause experts, I mean, I don't know how much the lay public is really paying attention to that. I think the criticism of that is that, first of all, CBT is not widely available. Okay, it's not. It's also not inexpensive. I mean, it's not.
yeah,
It's just not widely available at all. And where are people supposed to be going to get this CBT? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. And I think the other thing is that I think for insomnia, that's really like insomnia, right? Not hormonally mediated. Um,
mm,
that's just a different situation. Like,
yeah,
where really our hot flat, that it also positions a lot of the symptomatology that can be that is well documented as being extremely disruptive and severe, like vasomotor symptoms, like hot flashes, night sweats, as like somehow psychological in basis, which it's not. So I don't get it. And I'm not going to lie. I had a lot of other things going on and I didn't do a deep dive into all the literature, but I certainly was
totally fine.
involved in the response to it because I think it was like also weirdly anti-estrogen. I
It
think a
felt like it
lot
was
of the data that comes
gaslighting
out,
too.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's why I'm saying, and like, as if like a psychological issue isn't a thing, but it's like your night sweats that soak through your sheets are absolutely not going to get better with CBT, that you can't find a practitioner for, that costs a lot of money out of pocket. Like, what? Like, it just was so
Yeah.
tone deaf. And I think this is a whole other conversation, but I think it's important for the listeners to understand there's a lot of like weird back channel politics around this stuff and around people who have published on this and are considered experts in their field for decades, and these experts' experience of cognitive dissonance, like the data is coming at them that just does not fit their narrative from 25 years ago, or specifically from 22 years ago, and they just cannot see it. It's like their frontal lobe shut down. So, because there have been conversations, and there's a lot of like weird stuff around that. So, I'm not against CBT. If it works for you and you can access it and you want to use it, you should do it. I personally, and insomnia and sleep disruption specifically is one of the worst problems that people face, humans, all kinds of
Yeah.
humans, because it sets you up for more insulin resistance, for cortisol release, for much more stress, for inflammation and mood disorders. And then you can't actually attack lifestyle in terms of like, looking at your nutrition, looking at your fitness and movement, because you feel so terrible. We know that people reach for different kinds of food when they are sleep deprived. We know that,
Yep.
nighttime shift workers have much worse health outcomes. So if your sleep doesn't get dealt with, like, it's going to be hard to do the rest of it. So I think that was the other reason that people kind of responded to that, because they were just like, what? And you nailed it. It felt gaslighty. It really did.
It
It
did.
was
And it
weird.
was so, and especially in the midst of this major conversation that's happening worldwide about access to hormones, to have this government document come out and say, oh, actually, try CBT first. It was like, wait,
Yeah, you don't
what?
need hormones.
So, so
Okay.
if we could just kind of like summarize, because the non-hormonal conversation, I think everybody, whether you use hormones or not, you need to be thinking about the non-hormonal ways to support your symptoms,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
just kind of your health. So it really is a conversation for everyone. But if somebody is in that like small group of people who can't, or people like me who tried and it just didn't work, what do you
Right.
feel are kind of the avenues for them to explore options that are going to be evidence-based? Oh,
I think sleep hygiene is really, really overlooked. And I want people to look up sleep hygiene. I'll mention a couple of things. Keeping the room cool. And there are things you can do, by the way, if you are having vasomotor symptoms and hot flushes. There's cooling jets, mattresses. They're expensive, but they work really, really well. Keeping that room cool. Nobody wants to do this, Jen. You've got to turn your blue light off like an hour or two before you go to bed. You've got to put the phone down. You just have to. I can't tell you how many people I have this conversation with, and I'm like, tell me the truth. Come on. Are you finishing emails? Is the TV on when you fall asleep?
yeah.
Dude, you're going to wake up. That is like very well documented. You just got to do it. Looking at alcohol intake. Alcohol intake is not good for you in general, but it's really bad for sleep. Looking at limiting caffeine, resetting and committing to circadian rhythms. People really want to take a lot of melatonin. I'm a little plus minus on melatonin. So I don't think it's dangerous, but the problem is you are trying to reestablish a circadian rhythm. Taking melatonin isn't where it's at. Getting early morning sunlight is, because early morning sunlight tells you, oh, now we're awake. It's going to help set that cycle. So really committing to looking at what sleep hygiene is I think very, very effective in combination with other things, right? So let's say we're talking about the hot flashes a lot because it's the most obvious, and I think that the data on botanicals around hot flashes is some of the most robust. But let me just say,
Yeah.
we're not going to have a 7-year study with the NIH does for $1 billion on 70,000 women, prospective randomized double blind on black cohosh. That's never going to happen. But we do have studies that are robust, that are interesting. And so you're talking about the EU. I mean, Germany in particular has some of the best data on botanical medicine that is out there. There's a lot of what we call ethnobotanical journals, scientific journals that have looked for ages at a lot of these kind of more indigenous remedies, and they're pretty good studies. So things like black cohosh have been shown to decrease hot flashing by like maybe 50%. Siberian rhubarb is also very effective for hot flashes. Chasteberry, we know Vitex is really helpful for a number of the sort of more perimenopausal PMS-y
Yep.
kind of symptoms. People get breast tenderness, mood stuff, and it's probably because one of the things it does is increases native progesterone production. So that probably works better in the more perimenopausal world. There are some great herbs for sleep, like jujube, which helps to restore sleep. Because a lot of times it's not falling asleep, it's staying asleep. And
Always.
jujube has been
It's always
shown
staying
to
asleep.
help you stay asleep. I think the cannabis literature, I really wish it was better.
I know.
I just wish they'd do more, but there's some decent data on use of various kinds, THC, CBN, CBD, CBG for mood and for sleep. I'm say it with caution. I'm really interested in looking more at what's happening with the mushrooms in general, like not just psilocybin and microdosing, which is very popular here, even though it's not legal, but also things like lion's mane for cognition
Mhm.
and focus. We know that there's a lot of really great data in the immune world with a lot of the mushrooms, turkey tail, reishi. There's great stuff on gut and immunity. So we don't have necessarily, we haven't made that leap to women's health, but I think there's a big discussion forthcoming around that. And the cool thing about the mushrooms is that the non-indigestibles are high in fiber and really good for the gut microbiome. Isn't that
Yep.
interesting? So you're getting like
Fiber, I mean, mushrooms are
lots
a
of
great source
things.
of soluble fiber. They're actually a source of beta
Yep,
glucan, very, very
yep,
like related to what's in oatmeal. So
yep,
mushrooms
yep.
across the spectrum
Mushrooms
are
are
awesome.
amazing. Yep, yep. So and
And
this is the thing, and let me say that this is the thing about the natural world. It's very hard in conventional medicine and empiric science. We take one little component, we amplify it, and we use that and we look at that in the lab because it's easier to study, and that's just the way we do it, and that's fine. That's the way it is. It's a little more complicated in botanical medicine and looking at herbs and these things and mushrooms, right, which are not plants, because you're looking at something called the entourage effect. You're looking at how all of these multiple components in the plant work together synergistically, and we can't always pull the one thing out, which is why it's harder to do these studies. So people just need to understand that. But the great thing about the entourage effect is you're getting more than one effect.
yeah, yeah.
So it's
And
kind
that
of
is
great.
the synergism of plant-based medicine,
Yeah.
and botanical medicine is that effect, that entourage effect, which I love that term.
Yeah.
My experience was also that soy and phytoestrogens from soy foods
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
extremely helpful. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the challenges with that is that, you have to eat it regularly,
Right.
essentially forever. And for some
Right.
people,
Right.
it's hard to wait 6 or 8 weeks or 10 weeks to notice a change. When you do, it's worth it, and it's easier to kind of keep going. But we're so used to something hurts, I just want it gone,
Yep.
that it's
Yep.
like, well, if it doesn't work in 72 hours, it's not working. And I think that's kind
Exactly.
of one of the challenges with any non-hormonal treatment, is that it is probably not going to have that immediacy of
That's a
effect that
huge, yeah,
we
that's a
come
huge
to
point.
expect.
That's a huge point. People need to be patient. It's hard to tell what is really affecting them. And I think as people are recognizing what's going on with their bodies and the developmental phase that they're going into, they're coming in earlier, which is great. But the thing about perimenopause is that not only is it a really long, trajectory, it could be a decade, but the hallmark of perimenopause is unpredictable fluctuations. So, sometimes somebody's like, I feel great immediately. And I'm like, you might be getting a period in 3 weeks, actually. Maybe you're not. You know what I mean? Like, or now they've finally started skipping 5 minutes in a row and they feel absolutely awful. And it's like, it's not that the herb is not working. It's that it's going to take longer and they're in a low state. So it's complicated. I mean, this is why perimenopause and menopause can be really challenging for people to experience, and for the practitioner working with them if they don't really know that this is like part and parcel. It's not
Yeah.
it's not a one and done. You're not going to like, here's your script for black cohosh, see you next year. That's not how it's going to work. And I think the other thing is the movement and fitness. I just want to say that, I know
Yes.
we got to wrap, but moving your body on a regular basis, getting your steps in, it's actually 7,500 steps a day is really for less mortality, not 10,000. That's debunked. Um, lifting heavier progressively, not overworking out. Like, I can't understate how important movement is for
And joyful
life.
movement, like doing things you
Yes.
enjoy, moving your body
Yes.
regularly in ways that you enjoy is, like, I think the piece that's missing from the movement conversations, especially in
Mm-hmm.
menopause.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm a big fan of movement, and I think that it's an essential part of being a human, is finding ways to move your body in
absolutely.
ways you enjoy.
Well, you're using your
Yeah.
brain at the same time too, so it's really, really good for the aging brain, getting the blood
Yeah.
flow and also like challenging it, dance, boxing, whatever it is you like to
Yep.
do. These are things that are, you have to move your body and use your brain in a new way. And so it's a challenge, it's fun, it's interesting, it keeps you going. And it really is, there are tons of documented impacts, not just on like your muscle and your bone, but on your brain.
Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your wisdom. As I always ask my guests, what do you think is the missing ingredient in midlife?
Oh, I mean, I think just ease. Like, why are we being so hard on
Mm.
ourselves?
Oh my gosh, I
Like,
love that so much.
I think some of what goes on is people just feel so overwhelmed and so burnt out. And maybe we need to listen to that and just slow down.
Lower the bar. That's what I'm all about. I love it.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So we will have links in the show notes to your book and how people can learn more about you. But thank you so much. It was lovely to have this conversation with you.
Oh, I'm so glad we did it. Thank you.
And if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please consider leaving a review or subscribing because it helps other women just like you find us and feel supported in midlife.